Hi, thanks everyone for being here. My name is Philip O'Farrell. I head up the international division of Viacom's brand solutions business. I spend a lot of my time evangelizing to the advertising community, to advertisers, about the symbiotic relationship between television and social media platforms, and in particular, a lot of conversation around Snapchat or Snap Inc. Some people may have read also, and it was widely reported, that Viacom created an ad sales partnership with Snapchat back at the beginning. So it's probably, that's part of the reason why I'm here today, to introduce an interview or ask some questions with Nick Bell. Nick is the Content Vice President of Snap Inc. Nick joined what was then known as Snapchat in May 2013. Having previously held positions of, well, the position of Senior Vice President of Digital Products at News Corporation in New York. So before we proceed, there was a few bits of housekeeping we wanted to do. First thing we wanted to ask everyone in the room, who uses Snapchat or who has used Snapchat? I would say that is 98 or 99% of the people in the audience. So that's
How many
good.
today? A little less. Okay.
Only a little bit less. So that was one thing we wanted to do. Secondly, it's been great response on the app. So thanks for everyone that sent in questions. What we've tried to do is take all those questions and mix them into a lot of conversation that we're going to have with Nick. So a lot of your questions, thank you, are in. We're also going to take a couple towards the end of the session, specifically on the screen here. If I can actually read it. So I've got my specs, so that's going to be the challenge towards the end. And then also in the last 5 minutes, we're going to take questions in the room. So please have a think if there's something that we've missed during the conversation. So Snap has been touted in some quarters as the future of television, with the recent introduction of the 3 to 5 minute short form videos, which are known as shows, being produced for the platform from a range of different content providers, including, I have to mention this, of course, Cribs from MTV within the Viacom stable. So are Snap's shows really the future of TV? And will TV ever truly become mobile first? And we were discussing this last night. I was predicting 20 years ago now, and I hear you all go, oh, well, I don't look old enough for that. 20 years ago, when I was working in mobile television at Nokia Ventures, that the future of television would be mobile first. And we're on that journey now. So before we begin to have a conversation with Nick and hopefully weave in lots of the questions you've had, we're going to have a look at the Snap Shows VT. So Nick, welcome to Edinburgh.
Thank you.
Before we dive into some of the questions, what we wanted to do is just get to know you a little bit more, first of all. So I read you made your first $1 million when you were just 16 years of age. Is that true? And if so, can you let us in on the secret?
So yeah, I sold my first business when I was 16. Did fairly well out of it for a 16-year-old. And thought that life was easy at that point. Subsequently, you know, a few years later, it's proven to be not quite as easy as I thought. And you know, I'm not trying to knock Jeff Bezos off the top spot yet, but you know, it's been fun.
I'd say that's pretty good going. So then you moved on to land a big job at News Corporation. How did that come about, and what was the experience like working there?
Yeah, so in the mid 2000s, I became a little bit obsessed with internet video. And became obsessed with the fact that internet video was not going to be sort of linear, but you would be able to interact with it. You'd be able to click to buy, click to vote, and created a business called Quick TV, which was about adding interactivity to video. I was obsessed with the idea, and we raised venture funding and tried for 5 years basically to make that business work, and failed. One of my non-executives at the time was the chief technology officer at News Corp. So you know, when I was at my wit's end, banging my head against the brick wall trying to make this business work, he offered me a lifeline, and I went to work at News Corp. So yeah, and then I spent 6 years building out digital products there, and getting to know what corporate America looked like as well, which was a fascinating experience.
Cool. So how did you then transition to be now working alongside Snapchat CEO Evan Spiegel?
So
Snap,
either or. So part of my role was to keep Rupert Murdoch abreast of what was going on in the world of digital, and introduce him to interesting people, talking through the latest trends, etc. So one of the people I introduced him to was Evan. Snap at the time had just turned down a pretty significant offer from both Google and Facebook, and Evan was in the headlines, and Rupert asked me a question one day, what is this Snapchat? So I kind of showed him, talked him through it. He was intrigued by who the founder was, so introduced him to Evan, and then Evan and I went for dinner that evening, and I ended up joining Snap. So.
See, that's how it can be done. So I think most of us will have heard about the recent repositioning of Snapchat to Snap Inc. So can you tell us a little bit about that and why it's, I guess, a slight shift in strategic focus?
Yeah, I think two things really. Snapchat was the first product that we created. Since then, we've released hardware with our first hardware product called Spectacles. And I think it just felt natural to have a holding company to house the various different products. And as we were preparing to go public, which we obviously did in March this year, rebranding as Snap as the holding company felt right. It's non-consumer facing, whereas both Snapchat and Spectacles are consumer facing, so slightly different messaging. If you go to the Snap Inc. website, you kind of get some of the boring stuff compared to if you go to Snap or Spectacles, where you get consumer facing stuff. Yeah,
okay, makes sense. So then let's segue into shows. So shows is obviously a word that's widely used in television, generally to describe an individual piece of content. Was the choice of your product shows a deliberate nod to television?
I'm not sure whether it was a deliberate nod. It just felt very natural. One of the things we try and do at Snapchat is call a spade, if you like, and not come up with confusing or extravagant words for what things are. So, a filter's a filter, a lens is a lens, and a show is a show. So, I think the key thing for us was, we took a huge amount of inspiration from TV. We love TV at Snap. We love print at Snap. We love traditional media, and they've really influenced how we've built products. And so I think it felt like a very natural evolution. Just because a show is being consumed on a different device in a different medium, it doesn't mean it's fundamentally different to something that's come before in terms of its great storytelling.
Yeah. That's good, because that's what I was saying many, many years ago. So we're kind of been on that journey, and it seems to align well. So can you talk a bit about audience size for some of the shows that you're now starting to have on the platform?
Yeah, so one of the things that we really believe at Snap is the value in shared enjoyment and the value in scarcity. So, Snap's not an open platform. We work very tightly with a handful of partners, and, on a daily basis, are really curating very heavily what appears on the platform. And we think this is interesting for a couple of reasons. I think first and foremost, I think Snap's about communicating with your friends. So, you open at the camera, you send snaps back and forth with your friends all day, and they're your close-knit group of friends. It's not some random guy that you went to high school with who you can't really remember and then suddenly adds you as a friend. These typically tend to be like your 7 to 10 to 15 really close friends, your nearest and dearest, who you're either seeing every day or certainly communicating with on a very regular basis. And so I think one of the things that became important for us is how do we spark conversation amongst friends? And, at Snap, we have a creative opinion, and that manifests itself in several products, and many of the products that we create, whether it's the dancing hot dog or the puking rainbow. These are cultural moments that we captured on Snapchat. And, one of the things that kind of makes me really proud, and, we laugh about it, but last year in the US, we had the #1 Halloween costume with the puking rainbow. It looks like this year will be #1 again, but certainly top 5 with the dancing hot dog. So we've really captured these moments, and I think you extend that to the world of content. And the thing that I loved about TV growing up was I'd get home from school, I'd turn on the TV, I'd flick between the 3 or 4 channels that were my favorite channels. If there was nothing on TV, I'd pick up the phone and speak to my friends. And then we discuss about either what we just watched on TV or what we're about to watch on TV. Yeah. And I think those two fundamentals of human behavior have been, embedded in us for decades now, and I don't think anything's changed. It's just we're bringing it to people in a slightly different way, and Snapchat in one device. And we separate the two experiences. You have communication on one side and content on the other, but we have this concept of sort of shared enjoyment about pieces of content that people can discuss. Yeah. And then when they go to school or the workplace the next day, they can discuss the show that they watched. So one of the things that has been really important for us is how we kind of market and how we lead with these shows so that we can consolidate audiences. Yeah. So if you look at the audience size now, some of our hit shows will reach 50 million people per episode, and that's kind of in a 24-hour window.
Which is encouraging and exciting for everyone in the audience that creates content. It's also interesting, your point, which I'm just sat here thinking about as you're saying that, when we used to get home from school, 3 or 4, and then 5 channels, and now look at us today. So the pace of change is quite remarkable. Do you want to talk about some of the shows that are being made right now, or perhaps just pick one that really excites you?
Yeah, so touching on the relationship with TV as well, because I think that's probably kind of useful context. I think one of the things that certainly I feel very strongly is there is no better place to watch, a 44-minute show than the glowing box on the wall. There's no better place to watch a great movie than sat on your sofa at home with a 50-inch screen and 7.1 surround and high definition, etc. Trying to consume long-form content on this device is just not a great experience. Having said that, we think that people are consuming more and more on mobile, so there's a real opportunity to start joining the dots between these devices. My belief is that mobile is not the TV killer. My belief is that mobile is actually the most complementary thing to TV that has ever been around. But if you look at shows on Snapchat, 75% of the audience for these shows are under the age of 25. So we're really capturing the audience who are probably not consuming TV at the same rate and pace and with the same engagement that they once were. So I think what's interesting for us is like, how do we start to join those dots? And I think one of the things we're interested in is how we create really great IP and work with IP holders to really maximize that IP. So we conducted a study earlier this year with Nielsen that basically sort of prove out what we were already anecdotally hearing, which was that Snapchat shows were driving tune into TV. So, take shows like The Voice, or take shows like The Bachelor that we've run in the US. What we were seeing is that these shows were getting 16% higher tune-in versus a 5 to 6% decline for people who weren't exposed on Snapchat. And therefore, people were being exposed to this IP, they were falling in love with it, and it was acting as a vehicle to get people to tune into TV. Yeah. So, I think that's one of the areas in which this is complementary. But, my belief going forward is that this becomes the remote control for your media consumption. So, whereas we see the set-top box maybe going away, what we see is the glowing box on the wall remaining, and this becoming a way to discover content and help monetize content with better ads. One of my biggest frustrations is when I'm watching stuff on catch-up on OTT products is I'm seeing, rheumatoid arthritis and female hygiene product ads. I'm the only one sat there at home watching these, and I'm like wondering who these ads are targeted at. That seems very bizarre now in a digital world where there's a very strong return path.
Yeah, so I think from a media owner, publisher and broadcast perspective, I would categorically agree with the social media platforms, Snapchat certainly being at the forefront of that, does drive, let's just call it tune-in, albeit how tune-in happens can be on many devices. So for me, that's really exciting. I guess one of the thoughts for those in the audience or watching online is, if you're not a big media owner, publisher, is there a way that you would work with an independent producer, for example, to come up with an idea which isn't tethered to linear broadcast?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the dangers with trying to work with broadcasters and linear IP is that people very quickly get in. And I've just said, Snapchat helps drive tune-in, but one of the things that's really important for us is that these shows are not just promotional marketing material. They're certainly not behind-the-scenes content. These got to be standalone great pieces of content. And we always say to people, go back up into the cloud and reimagine what these things look like, in the same way that if you're taking a novel and making a screenplay, you reimagine what this may be for the new medium. I think the other thing that's been fascinating for us, and probably where we differ from all of the other platforms out there right now, is that we see mobile as being fundamentally a new medium. We see mobile as being, you saw the video at the start of this. We see the aspects of creating a show as being fundamentally so different to creating linear. And that really has been driven out of the fact that Snapchatters are creating a new mobile language. Snapchat is coming up to 6 years old, and people are sending, billions of
that
snaps.
That in itself is quite frightening. 6 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Billions of snaps back and forth. And, every time they send a snap, they're advancing the kind of mobile language. And, I've given examples of this before, but, if you think about if this was being filmed for TV, we'd probably have a beautiful aerial shot over Edinburgh. We'd kind of come down the stairs on rails and zoom in our faces. If I was to snap this, I'd show you and me, and then I'd flip around on the audience and show where we were. So, you're starting to flip narratives. Yeah. So it goes much greater than just the kind of vertical nature, the on-screen graphics, etc., but actually impacts the storytelling. And I think why that's so interesting for us is because it now makes a lot of sense. If you look at the history of media, the very first radio show was a theatrical broadcast. The very first TV broadcast was taking a radio show and airing it. You fast forward, and all of a sudden you have the first versions of the New York Times website, which kind of look static replicas of the front page, being updated once a week, and we scoff at that now, but that's advanced very quickly. Again, and tying back to my experience trying to create interactive video, you look at the world of internet video, and initially we call these clips. And then people soon realized that actually good storytelling has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and therefore short form was born. So, with Snapchat, what we discovered with the Discover product, which was a product that we made for print partners, was that articles and text were performing better than short form video. Yeah. And this kind of made very little sense to us. So we started to deconstruct this, and we started to try and figure out why. And what we soon realized is that you can't just shoehorn short-form content onto a mobile device and expect it to work. It is a different way to consume, and therefore fast forward to where we are now, and what we've done is we've taken all of the insights and analytics and all of the advancement that our users are driving on a daily basis, and package that up into a playbook which we can take out to professional storytellers and help them understand how to make mobile video.
Well, that's a good point, because the next question was really going to be, if I'm a producer or even a network and I'm going into a development meeting with my colleagues to come up with this next amazing show that we're going to make huge ratings on the Snap platform, that was the question, is, well, how do you start? So the playbook, what should people know? What are the key ingredients, do you think?
So, we have a development team. We have a pretty clear view of how we want to program this. We like to work with networks. We think this concept of network is actually going to live on, and taking individual pieces of IP is fine, but actually we think building a longer-term sustainable relationships with partners where we can work to monetize and work to drive to other properties, etc., is kind of really interesting. And I think, how do we work? We work similar to other networks out there now, where there's, pitch process. We take anything from like a log line right through to, some people are approaching us now with canned content, which has been made for mobile, which they've, seen elsewhere. And, we're working through that development process. But I think the thing that's most important for us right now is that we figure out what the format is, and we learn very quickly with our partners, and we don't, we don't want everything to be cookie cutter, right? So, you've seen some of the simple kind of basics of what we think makes good mobile video there. It's obviously much more comprehensive than that, but, the thing for us right now is that we want to be experimental, we want to try new stuff, we want to pull away from the center, we don't want everything else to look exactly the same, so.
Okay, and then, so if you get to a point, I guess you kind of touched on it, is there well, I suppose there's two sides to this. What's the financial model, which is a kind of a broad question, but I suppose there's two. Inbound people that want to, let's just say, sell you content, work with you on content. It'd be nice for people to understand that a little bit.
So we get asked this a lot, and our answer is like we share revenue with partners, and that's often misunderstood to be like we will like try to make some money on it. I think the answer now is we have a pretty good financial model. We know we can certainly calculate and estimate the size of audience that we expect for these shows. We have a good flow of advertising through the platform, so we know sort of sell through, and we know the rate that we're expected to sell at. So we can model this pretty closely now. We do lean on our partners to finance right now, what I will say is like a lot of the shows on Snap that have been produced are profitable, and we're still in pretty early stages. So I think that certainly bodes well for the future. Yeah,
which kind of defunks the next question, which is, do you pay to commission shows? So the answer is it's kind of a flat no, or depends.
We haven't as yet, but we haven't got into the world of scripted yet. And so that is an interesting next juncture for us. Candidly, we haven't got into scripted yet because script is expensive, and we want to make sure that we understand as much as we can before we jump into that world with 2 feet. But I would expect to see some scripted stuff before the end of this year.
So does it feel like maybe there's I'm just thinking of other zones, there's maybe this space for, let's call it agents or agencies, somewhere in between, so a small producer could come to someone that wants to pre-fund, and then they can bring it to you as a paid up asset? Yeah,
so we have a number of different ways that we operate. So from the big broadcasters like ABC, NBC, BBC, Viacom, you mentioned that. But we also have independents, vertical networks, which was created by Liz Murdoch, which creates content specifically for mobile, and has produced original content just for Snap. So Phone Swap, for example, is a show that reached 15-60 million people an episode, and is actually going the other way. That show has been a huge success on Snap and is now being picked up by Linear. So that's kind of an interesting
really
story.
Exciting. Yeah.
So we work with various different companies, and I think from an independence point of view, certainly willing to have those conversations.
Okay, good. Are you planning on signing, let's just say, talent? Because sometimes in my world with some of our channels, where it's MTV is a good example, where you have cast members, it's very much reality, but when I talk about talent, are you seeing and would you sign up talent? And we see talent rise to the forefront, perhaps in the past on platforms such as YouTube, but do you see that as an opportunity?
I think like any great video, like talent's super important. You saw Erin Lim there, who's become a huge star in the US through her show The Rundown, which is just moved to 3 days a week. It's kind of interesting when you look at a show like that. The traditional Head and Shoulders talent of TV often doesn't translate particularly well to mobile. It's a slightly different experience. I talk a lot about how you shoot people for mobile, and it's like, if you think about, and this goes back to like how we're learning from our audience, but if you think about, if I was to snap my friend, I hold my phone in one hand slightly off center at kind of arm's length distance. That's what is now, the intimate shot for mobile. So like when you see people shot from a distance, Head and Shoulders, it feels very removed. So talent's very important. How you shoot talent's very important, but actually we think that people telling stories is a really engaging sort of format for mobile, and certainly when it's in 3 to 5 minute chunks, it like really brings it to life, rather than having these long distance shots that are traditionally TV and movies.
So ultimately, if someone's got a talent, it's going to somehow bubble up, come to your attention, and then there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
In theory. Okay. So this is going to show my type of viewing. So I love Planet Earth, but also The Voice as a show extension. So I suppose a bit of a move from being, call it a pure play show, to an extension of a an existing format. I think it was even this week, so The Voice has been nominated for an Emmy, or very recently. Which is great, to be very proud of. How did those come about? How did that start, that conversation?
So, you know, when we first started talking to Steve Burkett, the CEO at NBC, we started the conversation around the Olympics. And, you know, it was interesting because NBC had bought the Olympic rights for several years, or several runs into the future. I think like through to 2028, might be wrong on that, but, you know, a long way into the future. And, you know, I think one of the things they were concerned about is that if less people were watching the Olympics, this very big investment that they made would, you know, progressively have less and less value. So how do they maintain value in the Olympics franchise? And I think Steve's view was to get in front of as many people as possible. And so we worked with them on a plan for the Olympics, and the Olympics was a huge success on Snapchat in Rio last year. Over 35 million people in the US tuned into Olympics coverage on Snap, and you know, for both NBC and Snapchat, it was a, you know, a huge win. So the conversation continued about how we could do more together. You know, as many of you may have read, NBC subsequently invested in Snap, and you know, it really helped sort of tighten the relationship. And then when it came to The Voice, we really wanted to just bring, you know, the concept of talent show to mobile. So we actually opened it up to Snapchatters so they could submit content to, so they could audition through mobile, basically. And we had over 20,000 submissions in less than 12 hours, which was, you know, pretty good. And basically we ran a separate track to TV, very similar format, very familiar format for users, same judges, etc. But people who had submitted via the Snap sort of call to action. That was a huge success for the first season. Obviously, that was the season that we nominated for an Emmy. That's now gone into its second season. And I think we see a huge potential for running shows like that in the future where, you know, there's a new audience, but a very similar concept and a very similar format to what might be on linear, but is complementary. You know, again, as I said earlier, the one thing that we don't want is this kind of concept of behind the scenes.
Yeah. And was that a challenge, because it's a new platform, was it a challenge with the talent in that case, wanting to dig into the economics and that kind of thing?
You know, I think one of the benefits that we've got of working with a broadcaster is that a lot of those complications so far have been, you know, one step removed from us. Yeah. I'm sure those conversations are happening, but it's right now it's you know, not falling on our doorstep to resolve. So.
Okay. So other than obviously taking MTV Geordie Shore and doing extras with it, or you know, a whole different work stream, what would be, if there's any show out there, past, present, future, is there one that you think I really want to do that and make it amazing?
You know, I'm kind of upset. So there's a few things. I'd love the idea of doing a daily soap. So, you know, whether it be Coronation Street, EastEnders, whatever it may be, like bringing that to the world of Snapchat.
Spoken like a true Brit. Though.
Like a true Brit, yeah. Or, you know, sitcom like Friends, or an animation like The Simpsons. I think, you know, shows where they're a long run, where people fall in love with the characters and those, you know, characters play out day after day. I also think, you know, there's something great about The Simpsons, which I think would play very well on Snap, which is if you think about animation, or you think about comics, and so maybe Simpsons not a great idea, but like example. But if you think about comics, this concept of a storyboard and panes is very similar in my mind to snaps and how we piece snaps together. So, you know, really interested in how we start bringing animation to Snapchat with this concept that there are these short bursts of storytelling that feels very similar to comic strip.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Now we work together, or our businesses work together in a really meaningful way around promoting movie releases, theatrical releases. Do you think that that's an area that could start to, those worlds could come together, Snap and the movie industry, beyond, call it advertising?
Yes, I do. You know, I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is how we keep IP alive. And by that I mean, how do we keep IP alive between, you know, theatrical releases or between network season drops? You know, you can imagine a world with a Netflix where Stranger Things comes, and then between seasons of or between drops of Stranger Things, then there is kind of bridge content on Snap. You can imagine the same for you take any of Universal's movies and Pitch Perfect, or Fast and Furious, or any of these sort of franchise movies where they're coming along every couple of years. You can imagine where the gap here is continues to keep the IP alive by having bridge content live in between those drops, which I think is potentially very interesting.
Yeah, okay. And then I guess it's kind of the other end of the scale, and it does fit into shows, but not directly. It'd just be just to get a view on just generally around live events. You have the Snapchat Live Stories. Is that a world that you see expanding, or is it just kind of is what it is?
So the R Story product is really interesting because that was the first time that we actually produced professional premium content, if you like, on Snap. And for those of you who are maybe not Snapchatters or are not overly familiar, the R Story product is where we basically take submissions from Snapchatters who are in a particular location. They send them to Snap, and we basically curate them. So I often describe it as one of the biggest sort of outside broadcast trucks that exists. To put that into context and give you a sense of scale, if you take an event like the Super Bowl this year, we had over 600,000 snaps submitted for that event. Wow. So we pieced that together into a 3 to 5 minute story, so it's probably 70, 80 snaps in total, something like that. So we're using only a very small percentage. And I think what's interesting about that is, again, it creates this creative discipline of what actually makes a good snap, if you like, or what is a compelling snap. So when you've actually got humans making a decision about, we're going to include this one, we're not going to include that one, it actually starts to create, again, a sort of playbook. And that's obviously very important because when you've got 600,000 snaps being submitted, there's no way humans can look at every single snap. So we have to start using technology to aid with that selection process. What else I think becomes really interesting is how news starts to unfold. So earlier this year, we launched a product called Maps. And Maps basically allows you to see where your friends are, but also see what's happening anywhere in the world. You can scrub around on the map, and you can go to places and see what's happening there. Yeah. And I think what's fascinating about that is at the same time we changed the way you could submit to an R story. So you used to only be able to submit to an R story when there was an event that we'd created. So we would proactively program events and say, okay, there's going to be the Super Bowl, or there's going to be Fashion Week, or we run about 2,500 of those pre-programmed events a year. Now we say you can submit anytime from anywhere in the world. And so basically what that means is that you will start to see the map as a heat map. So you'll start to see areas which are over-indexing in terms of more snaps being submitted there than normal. So you could take Princess Street in Edinburgh. We know that at this time on a Wednesday, the volume of snaps will be X. If that is suddenly 4X, that volume, then we know that there's something happening, and we can put our news team on that to look at what's going on and potentially package it up into a story, provide context around that, etc. If you take a few of the examples that I think have been really interesting with this, the San Bernardino shooting in California last year started to unfold in front of us. We started getting snaps through which said, school in lockdown. And there were kids literally under their desks at school wondering what was going on. That then unfolded, and the snaps that came through started to tell the story of what was going on. So this first person and multiple perspective view of what's happening is really interesting. And I often say we have 173 million photojournalists out there in all corners of the globe right now, and we think that's very, very powerful for actually allowing people to discover what's happening in the world around them, from a hyper-local level right through to major news events. Yeah.
Well, we should touch on, because you've mentioned the geolocation feature. It was one of the questions that came through, of course, to touch on piracy and what your view is, privacy, and what your view is on that topic in that context.
Yeah, one of the challenges that we face as a company is often a lot of the people who write about Snap or who concerned about Snap aren't actually users of the product. So the Maps product, as I've been talking about, is a product where you can actually show yourself on the map. So you can show your Bitmoji, your little caricature, on the map, and you can also see your friends on the map. Having said that, you have to directly opt in. Initially you are not shown on the map. You are in what's aptly called ghost mode, if you know what the Snapchat logo is. So you're in ghost mode and you're not visible on the map.
Yeah.
The second piece is then you can decide whether, if you are visible, whether you want to be visible to all of your friends or just select friends. So I think the concerns around privacy are probably, a little unjustified, because you have complete control over who sees you, when they see you, and in any moment you can tap into ghost mode, and you go off the map.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's important is, like, as I mentioned earlier, Snap's not this huge network of loose friends. It's typically tight relationships. The traditional Snapchat user will have 7 to 10 friends who they communicate with very, very frequently. And not only are they their best friends on Snapchat, but they're actually their best friends, in the physical world. So it's slightly different to just, showing, Twitter is a product that I use every day, but I wouldn't feel very comfortable with all of my Twitter followers knowing exactly where I am, whereas my 7 best friends, I'm pretty comfortable then knowing
in that bar again.
Yeah, exactly. My 7 best friends are usually with me, so it's, yeah.
Okay. So let's, staying on Maps, any insight into where there's booming Snapchatters or snappers around the world? Where are the countries that are really exciting at the moment? So
Snap is has the highest growth and is most used in territories where there are a lot of smartphone devices and top-of-the-range smartphone devices, and there's really good cellular networks.
Yeah.
Snap is about communicating with your friends. So I often say, if you can't communicate with your friends when you're out and about, then it doesn't really work in the way it should. It's about that back and forth and constant communication, seeing something and snapping your friend and sharing it with them. So, we're huge in countries, as you would imagine. So North America, UK, France, Saudi Arabia is huge really for us. And if you look at North America, last quarter, for example, we added 4 million users in North America last quarter. So still very, very strong growth there.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe then moving on into the, let's just call it a slightly different world, which is hardware products. So spectacles. I remember being in a few locations, but certainly on Venice Beach, these big yellow machines popped up, wanted me to put some money in and get a product out. And when I truly understood the product, it got very exciting with the TV production hat on, because I could see lots of opportunities. What would you say to the television producer that's been in this business for a long time, how you could make gold out of using spectacles?
Spectacles are really interesting. I always use the example of just before the product was released, I was back home visiting my family in Northumberland and was jumping up and down on a trampoline with my niece and nephew, who are like 5 and 7, and I was trying to video them with my mobile device, and as soon as I get my phone out, they kind of do cheesy faces and start messing around, and it's you lose that sense of the moment that you're having. So I ran inside, put the spectacles on, and was able to hold their hands. They were throwing them up in the air, and it just creates a really kind of rich first-person experience, and it's kind of as close to the memory as being there the first time. So, when I watch that back in my memories now, it's as if I was there, which is kind of really fun and exciting. Again, I was wearing them around the Christmas table with my family last year, and I was watching that back the other day, and it's as if you were there. It's as you imagine it.
I have to say they're quite not. They look okay to wear. You don't look like you've gone mad.
Well, I think I think
a little compliment for the product there.
I think the reason I'm so excited about the spectacles product actually is because where that can go in the future. And the first thing that we really had to prove with that product, which we've been able to prove, is that we can get people, normal people in the street, to wear technology on their face. And that is something, it sounds kind of trivial, but actually that's something that's never been done before. If you look at previous kind of wearables, They weren't something that people felt they could just wear down the street. But you know, I was at Coachella this year, and there were literally hundreds of people at Coachella, the music festival, wearing spectacles very naturally, very comfortably. You know, they didn't look out of place. The only reason I recognized them is because, or certainly took note of them, is because, you know, I work at Snap. But you know, I think that was a big hurdle that we overcame, and I think therefore going forward, the second, third, fourth generation of those products get really exciting, because we proved out the one thing that we weren't sure is, like, can we actually create a product which is cool enough that people will wear?
And do you see that now scaling up and scaling out, if you will? So it's more easy to get than, I guess, online, or if you happen to live near a machine, you can go and get them. Yeah,
so we do sell them online. You know, initially we were selling them through these bots, which was kind of fun, and you know, a good way to get people to come and like experience the spectacles. You could try them on using augmented reality before you even actually purchase them. So, you know, it was a fun experience, but you know, that's becoming wider and more mainstream now. Yeah.
Okay. We're almost in time to go on to some questions. So have a think in the room if you want to ask a specific question, and we're going to take some more from the app. So I think one of the sort of came in through the app, but just I'll ask it as it is. So in some of the more eye-catching hype around show, is some of the more eye-catching hype around shows justified? And do you really think there's a significant shift in the way that everyone's going to be viewing TV? So I mean, we kind of sort of covered it, but do you think the hype's justified? Is it going to be a continued future growth?
I mean, I think it's inevitable that how people consume content is going to continue to change, and pretty rapidly. Mm-hmm. You know, people use Snapchat 18 plus times a day on average, and you know, the under 25 group are now spending more than 40 minutes a day using the product. So, you know, it's becoming a really sort of significant part of people's lives who use the product. One of the things that enables us to do is to help, you know, people really easily access content. They don't have to open another app. They don't have to go to a website. They don't have to, you know, go and sort of start flicking through trying to find stuff. We can present stuff to them in a really easy way. And I think that really becomes very powerful. You know, as I said earlier, I don't think this becomes the place, you know, what we're not trying to do is get people to watch long form content on this device. We think that the best content to consume on mobile is content that's made specifically for mobile, and is, you know, short in duration. 3 to 5 minutes in length is probably optimum. But having said that, why doesn't this become the place where you discover content and then swipe up and watch it on your TV? And I think that is the sort of conversation that we think is really interesting, and you know, it is a big part of our conversations with broadcasters.
Okay, so I guess as the collective audience, producers, maybe some talent out there, and certainly networks, you're kind of answering this already, but should they, collective, embrace fear? What words would you use if you were just saying to everyone in the audience, Snap as a business?
So, you know, our approach is to be very, is to have a very strong opinion on what we program, how we program it, what the format is. You know, we're not an open platform. We're not kind of taking a spray and pray approach of just like, give us your content and we're going to air it. So I think, you know, from that perspective, I think there's a big opportunity for us to have those conversations and collectively figure out what the opportunity is. You know, I think there's one thing for certain is like, we feel that we want to be friends of media. You know, we don't.
It's a good thing.
we actually feel like if you look at some of the other platforms, we think that it's probably more competitive to Snap in that nature, because they are trying to create these lean back experiences that, you know, work on desktop, work on TV, etc. We feel like the mobile opportunity is an opportunity to capture and target people when they're outside of the home.
Sure.
And, you know, when people come back into the living room, how do we collectively work to join up these experiences? So I think, you know, from that perspective, we're a friend, definitely, and you know, we think that the distribution, the technology, and the sort of discovery aids, matched with the developments we've made on the format, are very complementary to the best storytellers out there.
Yeah, brilliant, cool. So if anyone in the audience would like to ask Nick a question, we'll hand it over to the audience. If anyone's brave enough. If there is anyone. If not, there is one person. Let's go for it. And can you just say who you are, where you're from before the question, just so we can contextualize an answer?
Yeah, so Jason Mitchell from The Connected Set. We're a producer. I just wanted to get your view on Facebook, and obviously they're launching their video tab for long form. Is that something you think about doing as well?
So the question, I guess, there is like, what do we think of Facebook Watch? Is that the question? Yeah. So, I think I know the team there well, and I think they've just got a very different strategy to us. I think if you look at the roster of programming that they've got, it's very different to us. I think if you look at the kind of format which they're creating content around, it's very different to us. One of the huge benefits that we have at Snap is that we are mobile only. The other huge benefit that we have at Snap is that we've created a product and a format which is unique to Snapchat, and therefore, it's something that our audience are very used to using. It's full screen, it's video, it's got audio on. You make a conscious effort to tap into that piece of content and consume it. You can then tap through to it, advance, etc. And the ads are, sliced in amongst the content. So it's a format that's unique to us, and I think it's just very different to what else exists out there. I think if you look at what other platforms are doing, they're competing more with the YouTubes of the world rather than the mobile-focused approach that we're taking right now.
Okay, so have a think in the audience. I'm going to there's a couple of questions that come in here. Remarkably, I can see them without my glasses on, which is good. So, Nick, this is a tough one, I think, or maybe not. Instagram stories eroded views on Snap big time, it says here. I don't know if that's true or not. What's your USP now? Better analytics? Could you or would you invest in?
Say that last part.
Better analytics. Would you invest here? I'm not quite sure what that means, but let's deal with the first bit. Instagram stories have eroded views.
So that's not true, for a start. So
I'm just reading it.
Yeah. Who asked that question? Is that person in the room, out of interest? If they are, they're not brave enough to put their hand up. But yeah, so that's not true. I think if you look at, again, the number one question, there's a theme here with the previous question as well, relating to how other people are kind of copying from Snapchat. I think our view on that is you can copy buttons, you can copy features, you can copy functionality, but you can't really copy philosophy. And I think one of the big pieces about the product development process at Snap is we take a product design kind of approach with this. And I'm fortunate, and the reason I joined Snapchat in the first place is because I had dinner with Evan Spiegel and was like so impressed with him and his vision and his view on how and why they were creating products. And I think that's just very different. The reason why we create products and the thinking that goes into how we create this product or products is very different. For example, if you think about how content had been displayed in the digital world prior to Snapchat stories, it was in reverse chronological order. You went to a blog, or you went to a news feed, or you went to a website, and the very latest article was first, and so on and so forth. If you think about Snapchat stories, one of the things that Evan was determined was going to be true is that people tell stories in chronological order. If I'm telling you about my day yesterday, I start at breakfast, I go through lunch, I end at dinner. So he created a product, Snapchat Stories, which was in chronological order. And at the time, that seemed like new and remarkable, but actually it was, it's going back and it's just very traditional. Again, if you look at the concept of, when Snapchat came around initially, and the concept of ephemeral was new and different, and people thought it was bizarre and strange. In fact, if you look at the concept of storing everything, that was a very recent concept, really. That only came about with the advent of the personal computer. And the personal computer came around, and all of a sudden, everyone wanted to store everything. Evan decided that, we change on a daily basis. Most of the conversations that we have are throwaway. I'm not taking like detailed notes of this conversation. Most of the conversations I have on a daily basis, I don't record. So in fact, this concept of, throwing away conversation was actually very normal and very natural and was actually the default. So, I think when we start thinking about how we develop products, we take a lot of inspiration from the past, and we take a lot of inspiration from human psychology and how people use things and how people communicate, and put a spin on that for the future. And I think, one of the big differences between Snap and other platforms out there, which is kind of why we've used the tagline, we're a camera company, is we open at the camera. Snap is like a creation platform. And I think, if you compare Snapchat to the world before us, the camera for us is a little bit like the blinking cursor that you would get when you open up a word processor. It's the instigator for creating content. Yeah. Most other platforms that you go to, it's about consumption first. So again, I think the conversation and the questions we always get asked is like, how do we prevent Snap from just being continuously copied, and and preventing that from eroding our business? I think what I would say is that the underlying philosophy and views on how we create products is different, and therefore the pace of innovation is much faster. And we are creating products, as I said just before, purely for mobile. I remember teaching my grandmother how to use a computer 15, 20 years ago, and seeing her use a mouse was pretty comical. And it was just so foreign to her. And I think a lot of the conversation that I used to have three and a bit years ago when I first joined Snapchat is, why is Snapchat so hard to use? And what are you guys going to do to create a better UX? And I think the answer was, it's just different, and this is what mobile looks like. Yeah. There's not a button to do this, because there doesn't need to be a button. You just need to swipe up, etc. So I think our approach is like, we're building product for mobile, and we're building products to help solve problems and make the world a funner place.
Comprehensive answer. Right, we've got time probably for one more in the audience, a couple from here. So do you see space for factual programming on Snap? History, science, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you mentioned before, we ran Planet Earth earlier this year, which was like one of my favorites. And yeah, we were in conversations around a lot more factual programming like that. In the US, we recently launched a twice-a-day news show called Stay Tuned with NBC. And what day are we on? Monday this week, we launched a new daily news show with CNN. So, factual programming is something that we feel is a huge opportunity. And, I think what we're starting to see is that we're becoming the go-to news place for younger people. In less than a month, NBC's show reached over 29 million people in the US. So, it's starting to gain real traction, and people are coming back, and that's forming part of their daily media diet, if you like.
Cool. So, question in the audience. So we've got one.
Hi, I'm Ryan. We've got two questions. When it comes
Can you just say who you are, just so it...
So I create content for YouTube.
Okay.
So I've got two questions. First one is, where do you find your inspirations for new filters, and what is your favorite filter to use in Snapchat?
So the first question
is like, where'd you get your inspirations from for the filters, like the dog, all that kind of stuff? Okay. Where'd you get that from?
So the lenses, we actually call them lenses, but yeah. So the lens product, we have a team of people, and as a company as a whole, we kind of, all kind of brainstorm these ideas. But we have a team of people whose job it is to come up with fun and interesting ways to help apply, augmented reality technology to people's faces and to the wider world around you now. So that's just a traditional kind of creative process. My favorite was probably, and I'm not sure whether it made it to the UK, but the taco from Taco Bell, where you could turn your face into a taco, was pretty fun. And that was pretty fun for a number of reasons. It's because it's a good example of how a brand can get involved and add to the experience and create a fun interaction, whilst not overtly trying to sell a particular product. But that was to celebrate Cinco de Mayo, and it was a really fun lens, and was used hundreds of millions of times, and it was a huge hit.
Cheers, thanks.
Perfect. So given that we've got amazing TV producers and directors here, we're running this thing to the nearest second. So we're going to take the last question from the audience over to the right, please, and then I'm going to wrap up.
Hi, my name's Nico Franks. I write for C21 Media. As Snap starts to invest more and more in content, how will it approach rights for scripted and unscripted IP? So will companies like Vertical Networks is doing be free to develop the IP for TV?
Yeah, so we see ourselves as part of the equation, and I often point to companies like Marvel, who I think have done a really good job of taking overarching IP and creating printed products, creating short form digital products, creating theatrical products, creating TV products, creating merchandise, etc. And I think we see at Snap with mobile, we see ourselves as being part of that mix. And I think one of the things that we want to work with IP and rights holders is bringing that IP to life as part of that mix. So again, talking about Vertical Networks, it's a huge success story for us that show that started on Snapchat became a hit. And again, I think this comes down to part of the way that we built the product, but you actually see it as phone swap. You tap into phone swap, and if you go on social media like Twitter at the time that phone swap's on, people are talking about phone swap. It's not just a video that appeared in a newsfeed, auto-played, and they kind of watched. They're actually making a concerted effort to tap on something and view it. That therefore builds value in that IP, which then gave them the opportunity to take that to linear, and then are reimagining that for what it may look like as a 30 or 60 minute show for TV. So, in that respect, our view is we want to be a part of the equation and actually help add value to that IP. And in some cases, we may invest in the overarching IP. In other cases, we may invest in just the made for mobile sort of incarnation of that.
So we have 59 seconds left. Impressive. You've made a number of good career choices, good moves. Can you give us, in 32 seconds, a prediction for the future of media? Anything you want.
Wow, in 32 seconds. I think, and this is something that I've said several times during this conversation, I think the biggest challenge is going to be how do people discover content? And I think our view on that is we want to make sure that shared enjoyment remains at the heart of that. I think one of the problems is like if you and I go to many of these media outlets today, we will see completely different things based on algorithms and personalization. But I think there's real value in creating consolidated enjoyment around single pieces of content and getting behind that. And I think, hats off to Ted and the team at Netflix. They've done a great job of that. If you and I go to Netflix today, we'll most likely see the same things in the hero box, and it allows us to share enjoyment around 13 Reasons Why or Stranger Things, whatever else.
Cool. Nick Bell from Snapchat, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.